That's right. It's pretty late for you, huh?
Yeah, it's 10 p.m. I'm not known for being on my game after 10 a.m. So see
10
how it
a.m.
goes.
I see. What's your regular bedtime? You're pretty early riser. I know you get up and do some runs and do some work in the morning.
Yeah, no, I never run in the morning, but
Hmm?
yeah, sometimes I can't run in the morning.
No, when we've traveled in the past, you've run in the morning.
Oh yeah,
Is that only because
that's
I
a big.
forced you to do it?
Yeah.
I see.
hmm
Hello, dearies. Welcome to Undersampled Radio episode, I don't know, 88 maybe. We have a very special guest on the show today and a good show coming up. But before we introduce our guest, I wanted to mention something that most of you probably already know about. That's right, delayed news and biased findings. That's what our show's about. There is a conference coming up in October called TensorFlow World. Have you heard about this, Matt?
I have not.
It sounds
What is
pretty
it?
cool. I don't know, but the link is in the show notes if you want to check it out for yourself. It is sponsored in part by Google. And I think that basically it's just a bunch of machine learning nerds getting together to talk about what they've done in the TensorFlow framework.
So it's kind of like a user group meeting kind of thing? Or,
Yeah, I guess
maybe?
so.
Tug, I expect it's probably called, or to fug.
Various methodologies united by a common framework. What is
Yeah, right. I like it. Okay. So where is it? Is it in Austin?
Santa Clara.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I see.
Yep.
So it's not a Google conference. It's like a commercial conference. Is it one of those type of things with a lot of invited?
Owned by O'Reilly, so.
Okay.
You know.
Okay, that's cool. I went to what's it called? God, can't remember. I went to a O'Reilly conference in London a few years ago, and I thought it was great. Actually, I really liked it. It was sort of one of the earlier data style, big data conferences. There were a lot of database people there, as I remember. CouchDB, MongoDB were all like, the folks in the exhibition bit. But it was one of the conferences that kind of opened my mind to what conferences should be like and have. And it had a bit of the kind of pizzazz with colored lights and electronic music before each speaker and stuff like that. But they had things like author office hours, which I thought was really cool, where you could go and like chat to the author. Like the author will be over there for, those times. So go catch them there. And they had birds of a feather type meetups going on. So yeah.
Cool.
You get your money's worth.
Awesome. So I just read your note in your show notes, and I want to hear your news instead of my news because I think it's more interesting. Markov chains. Let me jog your memory. You don't have
Markov chains. Yeah. Well, I mentioned Markov chains, and I was fiddling around with stratigraphic successions the other day. And
I can use a little background on that if you don't mind.
Do it.
Oh, right. Cool. Well, so a Markov process is a process
that I've got. It's the stratigraphic stuff I didn't follow.
Okay. So yeah. So just for our listeners, the idea is that the state at a given time step or spatial step depends only on the previous state, or potentially on some number of previous states, if you want to kind of generalize the process. And in a hidden Markov chain, you might also specify some hidden states which aren't expressed in the kind of end result. Anyway, stratigraphy is the sort of succession of rocks recorded in the rock record. So when you look at a cliff, say, you'd start at the bottom and go, here's a bunch of mudstone, and then we get gradually more sand, and then maybe there's a coarse sandstone and some pebbles that might represent, I guess the idea is that these different rock types represent different depositional environments. So there might be like offshore muds, a beach, a river, an alluvial fan, this kind of thing. And because that's recording what's happening at that place over time, there's this idea that it's a sequence, it's a succession that builds up in a one direction, through geological time, where because deposition environments are next to each other spatially, the idea is that if things evolve, quote unquote, smoothly, you will only ever see those neighboring rock types neighboring in a vertical sense as well, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. If you get a sudden jump from offshore mudstones to a river, something weird has happened. So there are sort of expected and unexpected or unusual transitions through this pile of rocks. So anyway, people have been applying this for quite a while in stratigraphy, I would say since like the 60s, Markov chains that is. And I was fiddling about with it. Anyway, I'm sorry, Graham, this is turning into a long... That was a recap. Another thing I've gone on about...
Fresh content coming up, warning.
Yeah. So you might be interested in this too, Carl, because this is, I think, quite an interesting problem.
I am. I thought those layers were there put by Satan to fool us into thinking the world was older than 6,000 years. So teach me more.
Well, wherever they came from, right. That's what we're interested in, the mind of Satan. So that was one problem. So the other side of the problem, and this is completely unrelated, or so I thought, was taking a pseudo-color image, right? So this is something like, say, a topographic map that someone has taken a color map and made a rendering of it as a raster, right? So, you see these sorts of images all the time in science, and they often represent maps or some kind of, 2 or 3D data set in geoscience. And what I was interested in was the problem of extracting data from a given map. So you come across you're reading a paper, you come across figure 3, there's a raster there, and you're like, I wish I had that digital elevation model or whatever, because I want to play around with it. How can I extract that data? And if you know the color map, it's quite easy, because you just have to basically use the color map as a lookup table, and you can look up each data value. If you don't know the color map, it's quite hard. It's quite a hard problem to solve. So I spent a bit of time 2 years ago trying to figure this out. And after I mentioned Markov chains the other day in a blog post, some chap in Finland goes, well, you could use Markov chains to solve your map problem, because you can infer the color map by looking at what colors are neighbors in this raster and make a Markov chain clever from it. Yeah.
So
yeah, I wish I'd
some chap, by the way, we should note, is Ari, who is like the puzzle master. He's awesome at figuring out these quirky little tidbits. And so
this is Ari Hartikainen in Finland, who's some kind of savant when it comes to data and NumPy. Anyway, so he and/or I will be blogging about this at some point.
Cool.
I better shut up. I'm sorry. I've got enough about it.
There must be at least one more assumption in there, right? Shouldn't it be that you're assuming it's a linear gradient or something like that? Because otherwise they could be two neighbors, but it could be very steep in that point, and because somebody used a crazy color map, and you could lose that fidelity.
Yes. Yeah. There are some things like the polarity of the data you can't infer. You also can't know the scale, unless you've got some other piece of information about where it starts and stops. And you also do have to assume that the mapping was linear in the first place, and there's a bunch of ways you could apply that assumption, I guess. You're absolutely right.
Which a reasonable person should have done, right? I would imagine, in creating a color palette.
Yeah, I mean, there are some famously bad color palettes, though, as you probably know. But still. So anyway, the next stop, the idea is to create a Twitter bot which looks for horrendous scientific images with like rainbow color bars, chastises the person for using that color bar, and fixes it and posts a better version with a perceptually linear color bar.
Hey, I like that.
You've probably already got this, but I wrote a Node app to do that a couple of years ago. So if you want the code, I can give it to you.
Oh, okay. A node app that like sits on Twitter watching for
Yeah.
whatever.
Mhm. Cool. Okay, let me introduce our guest
Please.
after the Matt soliloquy. So we have Kyle Polich on the show today. He is the author and owner of a podcast, my favorite podcast, called Data Skeptic. So welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thanks for having me.
I recently found out that your website has a donate button. You have you have a merch store. You have the whole thing. So I went on there and bought myself some merch, which I thought was awesome. So I know we have a lot of listeners to our show who are data scientists or are aspiring data scientists. So listen to Kyle's show, Data Skeptic, dataskeptic.com. It's awesome. If you want to donate to us, you can't because we don't accept donations. So go donate to Data Skeptic. And or I suppose you could fly to Austin, buy me a cup of coffee. I'll drink half of it, put the other half in a thermos, and mail it to Matt in Nova Scotia. Anyway, check out Data Skeptic. It's awesome. Thanks for joining us, Kyle. How do you know much about Markov chains?
Well, Markov chains play a big role in POMDPs, which are something I studied heavily in grad school. So a POMDP, or a partially observable Markov decision process. It's a beautiful framework that has slightly fallen out of favor because it's computationally expensive. Mm-hmm. But to give you the view from 50,000 feet, happy to go into more detail if you're interested. But basically, if you can state any problem in a somewhat formal way, like make the Markov assumption, simple stuff like that, you know the states, the universe of states, and the transition function, some kind of general assumptions, even if they're probabilistic, you have the model, then you can solve that, albeit in a very computationally expensive way. And the output is a policy that's a finite state machine. So to break that down even further, no matter how hard your situation is, you can come up with a very simple solution of how to behave to win at that game or to be optimal in that environment. And so Markov plays a big role in all the proofs that the thing converges or can converge under certain circumstances.
Cool. Yeah. Have you used this in industry?
Yeah, I think this is what I was going to ask. Like, what do you apply that to?
No, I'm constantly looking for excuses. It has been used in industry. One of the major authors, Anthony Cassandra, evidently started a consulting company where he just does POMDPs. I don't know how it went. They're not publicly traded or anything, but that's not really the measure of success. So yeah, I'm always looking for excuses, but I'm yet to find the one where I can take it to industry without wasting a client's time.
I mean, it seems like you would apply this in systems control settings, something like that.
For sure, yeah. Like a factory industrial thing with an array of valves and that kind of thing would be a great application. I was more interested in autonomous agents, so there's self-driving cars probably are doing some POMDP stuff. And there's been recent advancements where they've injected deep learning into POMDPs, which has been a major step forward. So lots of interesting stuff going on. Perhaps it'll become more common parlance in the next 5 or 10 years.
Cool. Yeah, let me jump to my last question in the show notes right now. I think it's appropriate. We've worked on a bunch of system control types of applications recently. One of over the past, I guess, couple of years now. One of which is most prevalent for my work, is in supply chain. So we do bunches of like rough and fine cut supply chain planning, and then maybe more concretely at the last stage of the supply chain for fulfillment chain planning. So we're actually routing, basically performing the vehicle routing problem. And we've sent vehicles around, built optimized schedules for pickups and drop-offs for various vehicles using reinforcement learning. Nice. Yeah, and it's kind of soft, though. It's not, in contrast to some of these other statistical methods, you kind of just have you have a pool of agents, and each agent drives one of the vehicles, whether it's a plane or a train or whatever. And I wonder, so I'm always wondering if the thing is sort of too autonomous, too hands off. We don't have a great mechanism for diving in and teasing out the details of particular neighborhoods or routes or anything like that.
It's a decentralized problem, or you can centralize it?
You can pseudo-centralize it based on constraints in the system. Like, for instance, if you have some sort of hours of service constraint, you might have particular neighborhoods in the system which are only capable of routing so many goods per time step, or you could have agent constraints, again, hours of service, where they're only each vehicle is only allowed to drive a certain number of hours before resting. But I don't know. It sounds like do you have finer grained control using a Pompey tree than you might have with something that's fully decentralized, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
I have some reading to do.
Yes,
excuse me while I read. Sorry. Just kidding.
So tell us about the podcast, Kyle. How'd you get into the podcasting biz?
Well, I guess at some point, I've always had kind of an affinity for radio type stuff, and was into books on tape and that sort of thing before there even were podcasts. It was a very natural transition for me to be an avid podcast consumer. And at some point, I wanted to do my own show. So it wasn't even necessarily going to be data science related. I had an idea to do a show called Caper, where every season is how to pull off a particular crime, and every episode is some step in it. So like a season on how to rob a bank. Well, you got to know, how do you check for if the notes are marked? How do you get the getaway car? Can you move it offshore and that kind of stuff? And it just seemed like a little bit of a legal gray zone. So I thought maybe an easier thing to do would be data skeptic.
I was going to say, do you live in the United States?
That's wonderful. I love it. So how long have you been a data scientist? And I assume that's what led you into the data science topic on the podcast.
Yeah, so I guess I have a cliched answer that I've been kind of doing it since before we had that terminology. I think my earliest title in industry was like algorithms engineer or something like that. And cool. As this term emerged, I was like, oh, I guess that's what I am. And at some point I got a new job and that was the title.
Nice.
I think I prefer algorithms engineer though.
Yeah, it does sound very cool.
Yeah.
What kind of companies were you working for?
A big mix. I worked a lot in ad tech. I worked in market research. And then as a consultant, I've kind of been all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I mean, you guys know as well as me, everybody has data, and the algorithms don't really discriminate by industry.
Yep. That's what I'm always telling my new customers. Cool. So you're actively consulting now then?
We're not necessarily taking on any projects at the moment, but that's the core of mostly what we do.
Cool. What kind of work have you got going on? Like what kind of industries are you in these days?
We're in one client we're winding up a big project with is in identity management. So a lot of heavy duty Spark, ETL, data engineering stuff. Another project is all Kinesis based. So a big streaming machine learning system. And then just kicking off some image recognition stuff that's it's going to be all TensorFlow based.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're deep in the thick of it. We often get mired in the details of data cleaning and just ETL stuff. So it's cool to be able to do some real heavy duty modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you're in a team there, or is that?
Yeah, so I've got 10 people. We're just a small little group, kind of like the A team. If you can find us, maybe you can hire us for job too dirty or whatever.
Yeah, awesome. I like that. Stay nimble.
That's great. That sounds like a lot of what Matt does. So Matt's got a company called Agile Scientific, and they work in geoscience and do a lot of quantitative consulting based around what, again, we would now call data science. So it's a lot of parallels there. Sounds cool. What kind of, so if you're in sort of varied industries and working on all these really neat problems, what kind of work do you prefer? I mean, what's your favorite stuff to work on?
I like to take on projects that are unique, where it's more than just, let's get the features in here, let's run XGBoost, and let's deploy it. It's like, I want to find something where there's a painful step that we're going to have to figure out something novel or interesting to work on. So when we can get it, that's what I prefer to take on. And obviously that's a little abstract. That can take a lot of forms. But that's half the fun, and the best part about it too is then to think, all right, do I have to build some specialized tool for this use case? or is there an opportunity here to build something more generalizable? And maybe that's IP that we can work with. So that's sort of the optimistic, aspirational model.
Cool. So you guys building sort of toolkits or stem cells to do asset-based consulting with now?
Yeah, the best thing we have along those lines, well, we have kind of two half-baked, one, I would say 3/4 baked thing and 1/4 baked thing. We have a platform for NLP and chatbots that is getting pretty advanced that we're going to actually do some announcements with later this year. And then we have some time series analysis software that someone who is less sane than we are would be able to work with. But at some point, we'll evolve it into a state where it's generalizable.
Nice. That's very cool. I've been doing a lot of NLP work recently, doing sort of narrative summary and text generation based off of stream of data input.
Nice.
So it's been cool. It is. I'm not an NLP expert by any means, and so it's been nice to kind of dig back deeply into the literature and start to play with some of these techniques. And because transfer learning is just such a powerful thing, and TensorFlow Hub and all these things, you can get pre-trained models. Kind of shocking how well you can do. With such little training.
Have you been playing around with BERT?
Yeah, I've been playing with BERT.
It's magic.
It's insane. I mean, so Matt, have you played with BERT?
No.
Yeah, it's you can do a bunch. It's pretty flexible framework, and one of the things that you can do with it that we've been using it for a little bit is to do machine translation. So we're not necessarily, unfortunately, this is a top secret project, so I can't go into specifics, but we're not necessarily doing natural language processing. We're doing sort of what would you call that? Unnatural language processing. That's it. Yeah, but very cool model.
Who is BERT then?
BERT is a new, it's a continuation. There's been a couple of major papers. There was Elmo, and OpenAI has GPT-2 that there was some pseudo controversy around because they didn't release it. BERT is the model along those lines that Google released. And we could talk about the architecture, but the high level of it is it takes an arbitrary length text input and gives you a fixed length vector embedding. And just using those vector embeddings out of the box, no transfer learning, nothing special like that, it beats all the known benchmarks on a wide array of unrelated NLP tasks. So the embedding it offers you is encoded in such a way that machine learning just sucks it right up and knows what to do with it.
Amazing.
Pretty amazing. Use a transformer model.
So like Word2Vec, only adding more context to it, I guess, is another way to look at it.
Right, I see. Yeah, interesting.
Multi-head self-attention, they call it.
Yep.
I know some people like that. I noticed that a lot of your recent podcast episodes have been on NLP. Is that how the episodes have tended to sort of follow your current interests? Does it kind of go alongside like that, or is it totally dissociated?
Well, I'm interested in everything we do on the show, genuinely, but we pick 2 themes a year. We just started this, I guess, this is kind of like our 2.5 year. So like last year, January through June was artificial intelligence. July through December was fake news. And we've been on natural language processing since the start of the year. We'll switch in July. And so having these kind of themes does a couple of things for me. One, it makes the show actually a lot easier to produce because the boundaries of what I might consider are constrained. So I can go do a literature search and say like, all right, here's 5 papers I want to interview all the authors of, or different projects. So thematically helps me plan things. But I think also kind of makes the show a little bit more cohesive and good to follow in the way that, a TV show, well, I guess TV shows don't fit the model. Something like Doctor Who, right? If you don't like a doctor, all right, stop watching for a couple of years. Oh, they're doing something new. Let me check it out again. So I hope that I'm kind of producing something akin to like an album in that regard. Like people will go back to themes, and that's, I can tell you to start someplace that interests you.
Very cool.
Yeah, and they also seems to give you the opportunity to sort of say, well, we'll talk about that in a future, like these things are coming up, so you can have little cliffhangers, and we'll get into that next week, kind of thing. I thought that was really nice to have those hooks.
Yeah, I get to do my Ken Burns impression, I guess.
Like it. Do you use the show for marketing? I mean, do you drive much business through the podcast?
Not really. Like an avid listener wouldn't be aware of what I do kind of commercially. I obviously that's always there. It's a thought, but I've had a consistent workload, and people have found me from the podcast. So I do have, I would say, a good third of our clients have come from people who knew me from the show, which has been great. But I've never been like, hey, call me up to set up an appointment and do this and that. I don't know. I haven't really needed it, and I'm also a little afraid that I would kind of get a response of people who just want to pick my brain, which I love doing, like after a conference and all that kind of stuff. But if we're going to set up a call, and I guess I want to work with people who are a little bit more serious about a project, and my network has been best for that.
Sure, gotcha. Yeah, when we started Undersampled Radio, what was that? I think it was also 2.5 years ago, right, Matt?
Sounds plausible.
Thank you. I was kind of thinking that we would use it to drive business a bit, and then what we found, or at least what I found, I hope Matt feels the same way, is that I just had fun doing it, and I like chatting with folks and hearing about what everybody else is working on. It's such a good way of kind of seeing what's coming up, what's new, and what people are working on, sort of in alpha.
Yeah. And there is, I mean, that can change at any time. Obviously, you could like super commercialize this at any moment. But even just besides that, just getting on and talking about whatever, some listeners are going to develop a certain affinity for you. And you grow the audience big enough, there's going to be somebody who says, I want to work with Matt and Graham because I get where they're at. I know where they're coming from. I hear them every week, and I have a certain, one-sided rapport with them. And I certainly feel that about a lot of shows I listen to. And I think, that's part of your pitch in a very subtle sort of way, long-term, I guess.
Yeah. What are your favorite podcasts?
Oh boy, I got to grab my phone. I'm kind of a maniac. I've got thousands. Well, that's an exaggeration, but quite a bit. Skeptic's Guide to the Universe and Skeptoid, I really enjoy. The Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It podcast. Let's see. Got you guys in here. I've got the master feed from Changelog. Software Engineering Daily is great. Be Reasonable is a lot of fun. I could go on a Science Friday. There's so much good content out there.
Yeah.
Do you have a commute or something where you listen? Like how do you squeeze these things in?
Commute's a part of it. Chores. Certain things I can listen to while I work, or at least do certain types of work. There are days when it's like, all right, I've got some mostly refactoring and query writing to do. I can listen to two people casually talk while that's going on.
Yeah,
right.
So good. It's good to hear that you still stay in it. I mean, it sounds from your show like you really enjoy doing the technical work, and having 10 employees, it could be easy to get lost in the administrative details.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got my co-founder who helps out with all that. She does all the hard work, so I get to do the fun stuff. I don't know how I arrange that, but it works great.
Nice.
That's awesome. Is she your sidekick on the podcast?
She is, yeah. Linda, who's also my wife. So I got her locked in on
great.
A couple levels.
Nice. Yeah, it works really well, that conversation. I like it.
Thank you.
Do you script much of it? Like, because you've got a very kind of natural style, and it's sort of so natural that I feel like, that can't be scripted, but also it just flows so well. I feel like it must be. Like, how much time do you spend thinking about flow?
A fair amount. I try and come in with the structure in my head, not really a script, but ideally the high points. What do I really want to get across? But there's also this sort of combative isn't the right word, but Linda's not there to learn necessarily the way, like if I had gotten some data science intern who just wants to be a sponge of knowledge. So
Right.
A lot of times I'm trying to brush through the problem, and I wouldn't say actively disinterested, but she's not trying to be the world's greatest data scientist. So she keeps me honest in a lot of ways. And I have to like relate it to more process and everyday things, which I think has actually been a secret to the better episodes, because I can't just say like, oh yeah, convergence on, piecewise linear convex, whatever. She's gonna say, what the heck is that, or why am I interested? And so I do have an outline going in, but we don't always stick to it.
Yeah, that's cool. It's amazing how even just if the person's not present, having someone in mind when you're describing something that's a bit complicated is a really powerful
Totally.
sort of mental tool. And yeah, like we definitely, I think I'm sure all technical disciplines suffer from the same thing, but it's really easy to start talking past people, and you're sort of talking to yourself essentially.
Yeah.
It's really
I've
not
been
very
to so many
constructive.
lectures like that.
Yeah. It's so hard to remember what it felt like, right? To be the other person on the other side of that.
Very true. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like there's got to be a mind hack to keep yourself from running away like that. But I haven't discovered it. We teach a class. So one of the things we've been doing a lot lately is teaching Python to like total beginners. And luckily, like one of the people that I teach with a lot, he only really learned Python a couple of years ago. So it's amazing how much difference it makes having him in the room.
That's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a better teacher than I am because of it. Like you need to like it's really almost like. I mean, there's certainly some masters make fantastic teachers, but I feel like in general, the best teacher is someone who's only like a couple of steps ahead of you and can still like reach back and hold your hand.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Need someone to tap you on the shoulder.
Do you do much teaching, Kyle?
Not as much as I used to. I used to do an online mentoring thing that I just don't have the time for anymore. I've been involved in a couple little boot camps and things like that here and there. I'll give workshop seminars once in a while, which I guess is a form of teaching. But yeah, I've had to kind of buckle down and focus more on projects in the business lately.
Mm-hmm. Do you miss it? I like to teach, but I don't do very much anymore.
I enjoy it, but I enjoy it if I'm working with someone a little bit more long term. Mm-hmm. Just having like, oh, we're going to do this webinar or something. I don't know the starting points. I don't know how technical to be. I'd rather grab a hold of somebody and take them through a journey. And that's a much more involved commitment that I don't always, at this time at least, have the ability to make.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder, so I have some friends in data science who will go and work for the boot camps to go mentor one student at a time. And that it's sort of a similar type of problem. So this person is just now getting, the students are just now getting spun up on data science, and it's hard to get a foothold or dive deeply into a particular area of expertise with someone who's just at that very raw beginning. I think there's a little bit of frustration there. But I don't know. I like the total intro teaching. I find it fun to just absolutely fire hose people with all this amazing information and give them resources, but maybe students don't appreciate that, I guess.
What does total intro mean to you? I'm reminded of Carl Sagan, who said, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe.
That's true. It is true.
Yeah, well, there was a thing, I can't remember who posted it the other day, but there was a cartoon, or actually it was a photo that had been annotated in a meme-ish kind of way. And it was a set of stairs, and they were labeled, I can't really remember, and it doesn't really matter, but it was something like statistics, algorithms, object-oriented programming, machine learning. And there was a kid trying to step onto the top step from the bottom.
Yeah,
and it sort of said, everybody learning to code or something like that.
Sure.
And they always really set me thinking those things, because at first I had a bit of a reaction, because there's a bit of a thing that especially smart people like to do, where they're like, machine learning is really hard. I've been doing it for years. You can't just like walk in here
Uh-huh.
You know, you ain't just gonna do this. Like, I'm being awesome here. So there's a bit of kind of jealousy, I suppose, is how I perceive
Sure.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's also a lot of truth to it, because we experience it in our class. Like, everyone just wants to get to machine learning. No one wants to learn about dictionaries and NumPy arrays.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, you need this. Like, trust me. I don't know. I really struggle. Like, do you have an opinion on, like, is it something that everyone should be doing? Is it something all scientists should know how to do, like code, machine learning? Is it do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or is it something that takes years and years and you're just going to have to suck it up?
Well, coding, yes. I can't imagine anyone being a serious scientist or engineer who's not going to learn to code on some level. It's sort of like, I'm a little bit too young to say I remember this, but there was a time when people would say, do I need to learn how to type properly and use the home row and all that stuff? And that's laughable today. It's like, yes, the keyboard is the human tool for input. You have to have that skill, and you don't even put it on a resume because would be like,
Right.
why is this here? Coding's going to become like that, but coding's also going to get easier. I mean, I started with Pascal and stuff like that, and C. If you start on Python, my God, you have a head start.
Yeah.
So just, easier, better tooling, better instructions and teaching kind of make that more accessible. And code is just the way to get anything done. I have had the pleasure of every once in a while. Well, I know in a lot of organizations, there's some non-technical person who is a wizard at Excel. And they create these like prison inventions. I don't know if you guys know about prison inventions. I had a coffee table book of it once.
Tell me what that means.
So people in prisons would want some item, and you can't get a lot there. So they'd take like a bed spring and a straw and whatever they could get, and they'd make themselves a violin or whatever it was.
It's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's exactly what it is.
That's Excel. And it's like, in a way, it's beautiful. Like, we should put those things in museums and gasp at them. Like, can you believe that they pulled that out? I once saw a Excel spreadsheet that was like almost a gigabyte. And the woman who'd created it kept running into all these like out of range issues. So she'd cooked up this scheme where the name of the tab was this like pointer, and she could read that and go to a tab. It was amazing. And I was like, please, can I just teach you Python and give you pandas? Because you could do this in like an afternoon. Like, what you've done is wonderful, but you weren't equipped with the proper tools. And, so stuff like that is just going to continue to get easier and easier. And anyone in science and engineering is going to do some version of coding. Machine learning, I'm not sure. I think a lot of machine learning is going to become more and more automated, but there's always going to be a point. Well, I don't know if I should say always. I think for the foreseeable future, where there's at least some amount of domain knowledge and some amount of knowing the consequences of the methodologies that does require a practitioner in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's really interesting to me, especially as like I say, we go through teaching all these people, and I guess my concern is, because we do actually get to pandas and scikit-learn, and we do spend a day, taking people through, like, look how easy it is to train models. Woohoo! Let's train all the models. And it's kind of enthralling, and sure, like, not everybody is kind of still with us at that point. I think for some people at that point, we're just on a bus tour, which is fine, I think, because they're hearing some language and they're seeing some concepts, and I think that's important for the, let's say, consumers and interactors with data scientists to be.
And they get reference material.
And they get reference material, sure. It's context for the new way we do stuff. But I do wonder a bit if we're heading towards a stage where we end up almost with a new set of prison inventions, where like now, instead of crazy spreadsheets everywhere, and we end up with crazy models everywhere and broken CSV files and just like random Jupyter notebooks on everyone's C drives, and no one knows what anything does, and there's no QC anywhere. So I feel like that headache No one's got that headache yet, at least not in the domain that we work in, which is
Mhm.
mostly sort of petroleum and subsurface. But I feel a bit like that's where we might be heading. And in a couple of years, people are going to start going, hang on a minute, I'm not sure I want everyone to code anymore because now we've got a new chaos, right?
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but if you get that skill, then you have the ability to clean up.
Yes. Okay.
Because it's
Yeah,
a lot
but
more
there's-
customizable than Excel.
But I still feel the pain. I mean, just because we have GitHub doesn't mean that everything was checked in the right way and is organized. There
Yeah.
can be institutional amnesia as people leave and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. You're right, though, Graham. At least you've got, at least now you've got people with the skills to, in principle, anyway, fix it. But I think, like you're sort of alluding to, Carl, I think you need also people who are saying, essentially, you're going to need a whole new bunch of ways for IT to sort of operate, hopefully in a sympathetic way and not a, stop everything way, to put pieces in place to say, here's how we're going to use GitHub, and here's what like source control looks like, and here's what testing looks like, and here's how we document things in this company, and here's a path to, making command line interfaces or making web apps, and it's going to be like this. You're not just going to publish random nonsense everywhere. I don't know. They're nowhere near there yet.
Practices in place.
Say that again.
Many organizations do have those practices in place.
Yeah, organizations that are already tech loaded and data heavy and
what's the ultimate outcome? I mean, it seems like one end of the spectrum is total stateless. I don't want to use the word computation. Stateless information retrieval, right? So if you imagine a perfectly instantaneous auto ML framework where you could ask a question and it would learn and give you the answer, and you didn't have to have any infra or data store. Well, I mean, I guess you have to have a data store, but I dream of that day. But you're right. I mean, to Kyle's point, you still have to. I mean, the fun stuff then is the quirky stuff, is the custom, hardcore. No existing solutions can work for this.
Yeah, well, maybe that's the point of sort of value creation. That's where you have to go, because if it's generic and solved, then it isn't valuable.
Yeah, we're working with a company right now who's heavily positioned in the AI domain, and they outsource their all of their model building and stuff, which I think is super smart. They get reproducible, repeatable results, and they don't have to spend tons and tons of time building infra and models that are simple but need to be built.
I kind of like the idea that you can make things, you can sort of force things to be sort of compact, reproducible, well documented and tested and stuff by externalizing all of it and saying, the only things I'm letting through my door are models that look like this. It kind of solves the problem, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. Okay. Kyle, do you guys do much work with auto ML or any solutions like that?
Not auto ML. It's something we've done some little proof of concepts with to make sure. You mean the GCP auto ML or just the idea of auto ML?
The idea. There's many ways to do it. Yeah.
We have something we built ourselves that essentially encodes documents as BERT vectors and then does XGBoost on top of that in an automated fashion to solve one of the functions in our chatbot stuff. But other than that, it's a lot of like, let's build a model and then wrap it in a Lambda function or in a Docker container and deploy it somewhere and go through a more formal release process.
And are these companies like enterprise size? I mean, you guys, what size companies are you building this stuff for?
I work with small and medium enterprise, so anywhere from, I guess our smallest is like 7 people to our largest is international and 500 people.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not totally on board with the outsourcing of everything model of modeling, but I do like the idea that you have this ultimately repeatable process. So if you can, I mean, as you guys know, it's such a big deal. It's almost the biggest deal to be able to shrink wrap data pipelines and their corresponding models to be able to roll back in, let's say, in deployment, or like to be able to reproduce a result, something like that. It's non-trivial. It's really complicated in some cases.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe one way is just outsource it, I guess, Matt.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, no, intuitively, I like the idea of, I value the ability to do things more than the thing, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's to me, that just feels like the valuable thing is to be able to do stuff. That's why I don't mind like giving virtually everything I do away, because the point is that I can do more of it. So I'm kind of married to that idea, but I don't know. I can see how it could work. I can also see how it could backfire, and you could get horribly taken for a ride and end up with essentially no, you know, oh, we don't actually have anything, and now we're totally beholden to this external thing. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not much of a business person, Graham, as you know.
Well, you build cool stuff, man.
Yeah. So I mean, there was one question in the show notes that I was quite interested in, which is sort of a bit broad, maybe, but I did want to give Kyle the chance to sort of chat about what he thinks what might be next, or what the way things are unfolding, like what, or maybe another way to put it, a more interesting way and less fluffy way, is like, what are you excited about over the next sort of year or two?
Streaming, number one. Serverless in conjunction with streaming, and then I would say transfer learning. I can elaborate, but I guess those are my high levels.
Right. So why do you place streaming so like first so emphatically?
Because the technology is, in my opinion, now mature enough that you can develop that way without it being a super painful thing. And running a business in that fashion offers a lot of advantages in terms of, so one of the things I'm trying to set up as we build one project out to be scalable, there's something we're working on that might eventually have multiple teams all contributing to it. So we're building it on top of Kinesis, and I'm enforcing a pretty strong schema on the event into the Kinesis stream. So new user signs up, new user event. This change happens, that's an event. And everything's totally event driven. So most of the time, it's just one publisher, one subscriber, very boring stuff. Why do streaming? Well, it's because at any time, a new subscriber could come in and say, I'm listening to that event. I want to do that. So if, for example, a marketing team comes online and they want to do some clever attribution, whatever, I don't want to be interrupted. I give them access to the stream. They can hire up independently or borrow people or whatever, but as long as you can kind of look at that stream go by, do some analytics on it and say, I see the universe of events that are here. I know which ones I want to build into my model. People can kind of function independently while having access to tap into that ground truth, granular, transactional event stream of the business. So it's, in my opinion, highly decoupled and allows you to do a lot of your implementation on things like Lambda functions, or even with like some batch container system, so that deployment is super easy and you're not worried about scalability, and there's just a lot of added benefits. And if it's all on one sort of standard process, and I'm not advocating for Kinesis, there are other ways one might do that, but don't reinvent the wheel, use something that's out there. I'm certain that other entrepreneurial people are going to build systems that plug into those. So on the day that a finance team wants to have some special thing for whatever bean counting BS they're doing. I just say, hey, we have the stream. We did everything good. You guys go plug into it and leave us alone because we're not going to get into this CapEx, OpEx stuff with you.
Nano service architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's, this continues to be the dream of microservice architecture, but you're right.
Yeah.
If you don't have any, you're basically talking about a system that has minimal architecture, right? You just let people, it's ground up. They can use it if they choose to use it. I'm more interested to hear why you're so psyched about transfer learning. Is it all about NLP?
Largely about NLP, image recognition as well, obviously. But one of the truths I think that has come around is this data is the new oil phrase. As much as that's a cliche, it's also very true. So, think from perspectives like ours, how can we ever consume or compete with one of the big cloud platforms who has all the data? Mm-hmm. Well, the answer is because they have all of the base data, but not necessarily an interest or an ability to extend it anywhere. So I'm working with one company right now that's in the billboard space. They've got a nice little corpus of images of billboards, but not necessarily something we could start from scratch and train models on. But some very basic transfer learning allows us to build models that introduce new features that they don't already have, extra metadata. And that's enabled only by the existence of some model that's trained on CFAR that I can go pick up and extend. And I think we're going to see more and more of that there's these epic models or epic, binaries that get released by bigger corporations, and they do the basics of some task. And it's feasible that the average technologist can extend them. And that only stays around as long as those models get released. But so far, that's been the trend.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to follow up with the question: what happens if some of these larger companies with tons and tons of data stop releasing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of one of these. I wouldn't call myself a libertarian by any stretch of the imagination, but I do believe that the free market can solve a lot of things. In fact, I'd rather people explain their politics statistically. So we all must believe that some percentage of problems can be solved by the free market. We're just going to disagree about what percentage that is. Even extremists that say it's 0 or it's 100%. We all agree that it's within that range. And there's not going to be one cloud provider or one big provider. So for you to say, no, we're closing this, you have to do things in our controlled walled garden environment, that's an opportunity for someone else to say, yeah, you know what, we're going to open ours up. And it seems to be the trend that's where opportunity will flow.
Maybe this is just my very narrow and uneducated perspective, but it feels like, I don't know, I'm just thinking about, say, stock prices. If you want to go find stock prices, there used to be places you could go get stock prices for nothing. You could go to Yahoo, they'd be 20 minutes behind or whatever. So it was only really for analysis, not for you couldn't do real-time trading with them. Yeah. But now there's nothing. All of it has been paywalled. All of it has been
really,
it's all been sort of basically exploited away, and so that's the free market. I guess that works for them, but my perception is that then you lose a whole stratum of experimenters and hackers, and it essentially now there's this sort of weight or a penalty on innovation that I think is just kind of it's sort of insidious in that it sort of goes by kind of unnoticed. But the heyday of the web API and the mashups is kind of over. And I wonder if a similar thing is coming with models as people start to realize, oh, actually, this trained model is worth something. And I can potentially get people to subscribe to it because I can constantly update it, right? I can have version 1.2, version 1.3. I mean, subscription models are a fantastic way to make money. So I predict that these trained models will go that way too.
I mean, I have no problem with that if the model maintainer is doing a value add in that process. Honestly, I don't think like BERT as a subscription makes much sense. I mean, yes, it has to be refreshed for new linguistical things in the evolution of language, but I mean, at the same time, not really. Or you could probably extend it yourself in that regard. So that might be someone trying to force a subscription model into a place that doesn't need to exist. But like the stock stuff, I don't know finance myself. So if there's everything's paywalled, I would imagine, as disappointing as that sounds, there must be somebody who's giving a reasonable hobbyist rate. And if it's like $7 a month for, reasonable access, I think that's fine. They are maintaining those APIs and, expending bandwidth. And presumably you want that for something that's investment oriented to the point where $7 a month is just kind of, an investment in your hobby. So I think there are models like that can work. So I'm somewhat optimistic about the whole process.
I mean, there is another way to incentivize use of those types of things, and this is typically done in the dark pool world. So there is some minimum trade limit that you get the data basically for free, right?
Okay, so that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a cool way to do it. Right? You're incentivized to use their data because potentially you can make money on their exchange and whatever. So it's an interesting way of doing things. All right. Well, before we run out of time, we have to do our trademark question here, which is, Kyle, what are you reading at the moment?
I just started Possible Minds, 25 Ways of Looking at AI. So this is just the book cover. I stuck the book in my bag. I don't read with book covers, but collection of essays edited by John Brockman from some big names like Seth Lloyd and Stuart Russell and Dan Dennett. All Tegmark's in here too. Cool. All people sharing thoughts and ideas about where AI may or may not be headed.
Is that the Edge Institute or whatever they're called?
I don't believe so. I know what you're talking about at a surface level. I think this is unrelated. I don't see Edge anywhere on here.
Okay.
But certainly a great overlap with that sort of idea. Yeah, this is Penguin Press.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I'm not actually reading it right now, but it's in my bag. I'm going away on Wednesday. It's in my bag. It's a fascinating book. I bought Dake's classic Fundamentals of Reservoir Engineering, which I've never had on my shelf. Probably flicking through it, I'm thinking I probably should have bought this book a long time ago. But I quite like these sort of collections of, essentially it's just a collection of equations. It's basically what it boils down to. And I'm on this, as you know, I like this reproducing papers and essentially turning papers and books and things into code. So that's going to be my hobby over the next few probably months, because it's quite a thick book, but it's the classic kind of reservoir engineering text.
Nice.
Sounds like good fun.
Keep me busy on the plane. What about you? What have you got? Oh, I think you still had. Oh, you've changed it.
Yeah. So when I finished my last book, I said I'm going to make a concerted effort to start pushing on my Espanol again. So I like to tell people that I'm watching movies in Spanish, but it's not really true because my Spanish isn't good enough. So there's this whole section on Netflix of children's cartoons and shows, and I can barely keep up at that level of Spanish. So
do you have the subtitles on or off?
I have them on in Spanish.
Okay, good idea. I like that.
Yeah, I can barely keep up. So it's fun. It's good fun, but it is almost, I can only sustain my interpretation for so long. So I do have to take a break after a while. Actually, anyway, it's not important, but highly recommended the Spanish children's cartoons on Netflix. Very good.
Okay.
Kyle, thanks for joining us on the show today. It was fascinating to talk to you.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah,
anytime you want to come back on, just send us a message. We'd love to hear more about the projects you're working on and the stuff that's up and coming in the biz.
Sounds good.
And POMDP.
Definitely.
That's it. Listeners, see you next week.